Thank you for the introduction. Thanks for Michael Yoshi for the invitation and opening the church and the continued work on Palestine. Last week was it that Alameda County declared recognition of Palestinian Culture Day, and that's due to the work of Michael Yoshi and the church. So really thank you for the continued commitment for justice, not only in here but transnationally. What I wanted to do is to give an overview quickly. History is important because if you don't begin in history, it begins to be only thinking about or responding to the most recent episode of violence directed at the Palestinians. Before we begin anything in terms of Palestine, one has to center Palestine is part of a colonial project that is intertwined with European settler colonialism and colonialism in general. If you look at the map of the world in 1914, 85% of the surface of the earth was a colony, either by a colony to the British, to the French, to the Dutch, to the Portuguese, to the Italians, and therefore Palestine is not an exception, right? Rather it was the norm for colonial projects to be sponsored, and Palestine is the last colonial project to be sponsored. And therefore we have to understand what colonial projects are all about. So this is the map of historical Palestine, thinking about the population figures as well as land ownership. In 1917, which is again we're in the 101 year anniversary of the Balfour Declaration, that basically promised Palestine to be created as a Jewish homeland to be handed to the Zionist movement. And from that point on, the process of dispossession of the Palestinians continued. The second part we need to understand is the Sykes-Picot Agreement. This is again, the French and the British got together to divvy up what's called the Middle East. I don't recognize anything called the Middle East because we're not in the middle relative to Europe. The term Middle East is a constructed colonial term that also we need to dispense with. But the Sykes-Picot Agreement crafted the borders that we actually know today in the area that is referred to as the Middle East. So I always say that Palestinians, Jordanians, Syrians, Lebanese owe more to the Sykes-Picot drafting the borders between them than to any Arab or Palestinians or Syrians actually sitting down and crafting the borders. So this is Sykes-Picot. Some would argue that today we're reliving another episode or possibly an extension of the Sykes-Picot Agreement because, again, some discuss we need 3 states in Iraq, we need 4 states in Syria, 2 states in Yemen, and all this discussion is taking place in the UK or in Washington, D.C. That's a Sykes-Picot Agreement that is unfolding, and we need to be aware of it. So the Balfour Declaration and the British Mandate, which essentially facilitated or incubated the Zionist project in Palestine. Zionism was incubated in Palestine by the European powers for their own interests. And we need to be aware of what were the British interests in this. The British were considering their own strategic interests to protect the Suez Canal and to protect Egypt as a colonial possession because much of the trade of the British from India passed through the Suez Canal and the Red Sea. Zionism accepted to be a junior partner in a settler colonial project in Palestine. There's no other ways to describe it. The contemporary Zionists actually suffer from obfuscation. They obfuscate their history as well as obfuscate what took place, especially from their initial partnership with the British for this project. Now, if we think about the roots of the conflict, Palestine from 1917 to 1947, every time you see a conflict around the southern hemisphere, you actually have to look either the British or the French have something to do with it. And again, the British incubated the Zionist project from 1917 to 1947, facilitating immigration, settlement, building of settlements, and transferring land ownership. In Palestine during the Mandate, if you're a part of the Zionist enterprise, facilitation of purchasing of land by means of the Jewish Agency, facilitating the arming of the settlers that began to take possession of certain lands in Palestine, Actually, the Jewish Legion from the First World War was incorporated into the mandate structure that began to be governing over Palestine. So essentially, the British facilitated this transfer in a systematic way over the period of time. The partition plan. You'll hear many Zionists immediately say, well, the Arabs or the Palestinians did not accept the partition plan. And using this as a framing, not actually saying that the partition plan originated initially in the 1930s from the Zionist movement itself. They actually forwarded the discussion about the partition plan initially, as well as the transfer idea, which becomes foundational to Zionist thinking, actually predates the partition plan. Herzl himself, as early as 1902, was speaking about transferring or spiriting the penniless Arab population across the border by procuring employment for it across the border. So again, the idea of transfer is central. What I wanted to demystify this notion that there's something unique about Zionism and something unique about the Palestinians. There are often the discussion that this is a complex problem. For me, nuclear physics is complex. Settler colonialism is not. It's actually very easy to understand. We lived it in this country. Right? There's two types of colonialism: settler colonialism and colonialism with a motherland. The UK, or the Great Britain, which is no longer great, thank God, was a colonial motherland with colonies that brought in natural resources and served as a place to dump their finished products. Today we call it globalization, but I'll set that aside. Settler colonialism is the different type. Settler colonialism comes in, takes the land, and does not have a need for the indigenous population. If you want a clear example of it, the Americas are the best, are the most successful settler colonial program. Right? And the rest of the population in America, at least in North America, we put them in reservations, or what I call them the Native American type of refugee camps for the Palestinians. Right? So all those that remained were put into the reservations, and the population either were committed to genocide or transferred. That's again settler colonialism: South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, and the Americas. So Zionism is not an exception. They think they're an exception, but I think they need to go through a 12-step program to recognize they're actually the norm rather than the exception. So Resolution 181 divided Palestine into two lands, or two states to be, one Arab and one Jewish state. Now important here, in Resolution 181 there was an erasure because there is no reference to Palestinians. In the same way that Balfour Declaration had an erasure, there is no reference to Palestinians. So in essence, throughout the 20th century, even up to today, there is discussion that there is no such thing as a Palestinian. And again, if there is no such thing as Palestinians, whom the Israelis are fighting? Must be ghosts, but we'll leave it as a side. The division was not fair or did not reflect the Palestinian perspective. Again, the Palestinians wanted to have a one state where all the citizens or all the population will be participant. So contrary to popular opinion, that the Palestinians did not want to live with the outsiders. It's a difference between somebody coming as a refugee needing help versus somebody coming to displace you. Right? So Zionism from its inception did not want to live with the Palestinians, wanted to actually dispense and expel the Palestinians. And for those who want, again, to read on the subject matter, I think Ilan Pappé's work is very critical. The Iron Wall of Lenny Brenner, as well as some of the early Jewish historians that dealt with the subject, is very critical for us to look at. And I often recommend for Zionists who have a denial to go and read Jabotinsky's writing. He has very clear statements about what he wanted to do from the early on period. The Nakba, which we're again commemorating 70 years of the Nakba, it was the systematic dispossession of the Palestinians. Almost 560 villages, 8 different urban centers that completely depopulated. And again, if you want to look at the narrative that still around, is that the Arabs left of their own accords. Again, this is another added insult to insult. Not that they expelled the Palestinians, dispossessed them, but actually almost erasing the history totally about what happened in 1948. It was systematic, deliberate, pre-planned, and in essence to empty Palestine because they wanted the land without the people, which is still today the same dynamics. Israel wants the land without the people, and therefore whatever strategies that are being deployed is still a continuation of the main epistemic of Zionism, meaning a settler colonial project that does not include the indigenous population. They're an impediment to be removed from Palestine. Land occupied in 1967 war. This includes the Sinai Desert, the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, and again, the Golan Heights. I know there is a forgetfulness, but the Golan Heights is an occupied, also land that Israel occupied. They annexed it thereafter, just like they annexed parts of Jerusalem, and now we're moving into another level of annexation. So these are lands that were taken in 1967. Another misnomer, Israel said, or Israeli spokespeople say that Israel had to act preemptively because it was supposed to be attacked. So if you want to use the language of preemptive, language that Bush uses, again, Israel have used it much earlier in 1967. Those who work on the history of the 1967, the Israeli army was preparing for that war as late as the 1950s. So any notion that this was a preemptive because of a threat has to be set aside. The US Army actually had a complete study and actually documented that the Israeli army would be able to roll over the combined Arab forces in less than 6 days. So the fact that they did it in 6 days meets the research that the US Army have put forth in this. The ongoing Nakba, again, and I don't want to go through that, but the ongoing Nakba can be looked on in terms of what's taking place in the West Bank. You have bypass roads. Now, here the roads have a religious identity. The only place in the world that a road, which is asphalt and gravel, have a religious identity, and therefore these are roads that are reserved for Zionist settlers only, and Palestinians, Muslim, Christians can't use these roads. All the land was taken and confiscated from the Palestinians in violation of the 4 Geneva Convention and international law. So we have bypass road settlements that are strangleholding over the Palestinian life. For those who followed the Oslo Agreement, Oslo is essentially, it was not a peace treaty, it was a security treaty. It was a security to shift the security responsibility to the Palestinians to secure the settlers from the Palestinians rather than actually bring a two-state solution as has been the discussion. Israel did not recognize Palestinian sovereignty. It did not admit to be an occupying force. So again, I tend to recommend a 12-step program for many things, but I think 3-step program would be much faster in here. You're occupying a people in the occupation. Then if you want to discuss peace, we could discuss it. So again, Israel, throughout Oslo Agreement, there is no mentioning of occupation. There is no mentioning of actually that there is a sovereignty for the Palestinians, and Israel does not recognize the territories to be occupied. Under Israeli law, they're disputed territories. And that's why in many places, settlers come in, they put their mobile home, and therefore now you have to refer to the Israeli military court. And the Israeli military court often is staffed by settler officers, and as such, your claim to that land, even from the Ottoman era, is equal to a settler who just put his mobile home, or if somebody comes and take a house in Jerusalem or Wadi Silwan or some of the villages, have the same type of criteria. So this is as early as early 1970, Israel defined the occupied territories as disputed territories, which means it removes the right of ownership of Palestinians in mass. So again, the bypass roads is part of the reality that the Palestinians face. And on top of this, you have the settlements, all right? All of these blue triangles are the settlements. And supposedly this is 2001, the future Palestinian state. So in the most recent discussion, the Trump deal of the century, right? Like many of his deals, like Trump University, that's basically what he's offering the Palestinians. The deal of the century says that they will offer 50% of the West Bank to the Palestinians. So it's not even to what was possibly the discussion. in there, and the settlement's basically footprint is overtaking much of the West Bank, dissecting the Palestinian areas into 5 discontiguous territories within the West Bank. Now, if you want to make a reference, Sharon, during his premiership as well as early period, he was enthralled with the South African model of homelands. And he wanted to actually set up a structure of a settlement structure that will create a model of Palestinian homelands, that they will not have sovereignty, what rather would be under the total domination of the Israeli army and military. And I think what we have in here is Palestinian homelands that are being constructed. Don't get the trapping of a flag, a phone exchange, or a flag or a stamp to take you from actually what we're getting into these homelands. Also the wall, which basically is a mass theft of about 10 to 12% of the West Bank, stealing 85% of the water, aquifers and the water system from the Palestinian territory, and adding insult to injury, some of the lands that farmers are unable to reach to. Israel have the audacity to say we're just going to implement Islamic law because you like Muslim law and Ottoman law. Any land that is not cultivated for 3 years actually resort back to public land because that was the Ottoman law of previous period. They don't inform us that the law says that if there's a public land that is uncultivated and you put your effort to cultivate it, you actually become its owner, and likewise if you stop cultivating it, it goes back to public land. These lands are not public land, these are private lands, so don't use, quote, Sharia law to try to dispossess the Palestinians. They're sophisticated, but this is the sophistication of the civilized settler colonialism that is being implemented in Palestine. The Gaza Strip, again, what is taking place. 90% of the Gaza population is refugees that were expelled from the 1948 areas. So as we watch people wanting to march for the right of return, to return to their homes and lands, and being faced with a firing squad, snipers, that are sitting across and sniping and shooting civilian population, killing 62 in one day and almost 2,000 injured in a systematic, deliberate way. Under international law, Israel is responsible for the safety and well-being of the Gaza population. Often we hear that Israel is not occupying the Gaza Strip. Well, if it's not occupying the Gaza Strip, why is it closing the border? Why is it arresting everybody out that comes out fishing from the Gaza? Why is it flying constantly over Gaza on a regular basis? And why is the birth registry is controlled by Israel? That's really a very funny type of freedom that the Palestinians have in the Gaza Strip. But again, we are in the period of the theater of the absurd, but Israel provides that it's a continuous 24/7 absurdity that we're living in relation to Gaza and other places as well. So again, the areas of bombing that we're facing on a regular basis, this is the 4th campaign that Israel unleashed on the Gaza population. Unemployment is about 80%. 90% of the children in Gaza face PTSD, post-traumatic stress syndrome. The health system is almost under total collapse. The water system in Gaza is completely undrinkable because of the seeping of the seawater, as well as the settlements who actually on the other side, or on the other side of the border, have sucked all the underwater from Gaza. So you're having a multiple devastation. That also includes the regional actors. Egypt, the Gulf states are preoccupied because they want to launch a war on Iran. And let me be very clear. AIPAC today is lobbying for a war on Iran. So let's make sure that this is part of the discussion when we speak about the next war that is coming, to make sure who is actually pushing for the war. John Bolton right now in the National Security Council is edging, if he wants to bomb first and discuss later relative to the situation. So you have regional actors that are positioning themselves to reorient the region into another war. And the war is business, so military-industrial complex will continue to have another lease on life for 10 to 15 and 20 years. So this is the dynamics that we are dealing with. And this is just another side of the Gaza Strip, just to understand the restrictions that is taking place relative to the population. I didn't address the movement of the embassy to Jerusalem. and hopefully we could have a discussion about it. But this is, again, is in violation, the United States in violation of international law, the Geneva Convention, and the United States, because of the current configuration politically in Washington, as well as within Israel with the current dynamics, that the shift is basically consolidating Israel's annexation of Jerusalem and making sure that whatever people think of the two-state solution is dead. What you have is really a Swiss cheese that has no possibility of constituting a two-state solution, which results for us to begin to have a different discussion about how we deal with Israel, how we deal with our own policy and complicity in the United States, and make sure that constantly we support the BDS movement, the boycott, the investment and sanction. This is something that is fundamental in our work. Thank you.
Our thanks to Dr. Bazian for giving us such a detailed and enlightened overview. So now we turn to Ziad Abbas, who's going to share this personal story of his family's displacement and also some events in Gaza.
You should switch. I don't know how much space I have.
مساء الخير. How many people speaking Arabic? I'm going to present in Arabic language.
Simultaneous translation.
Yeah, Hatem will do the translation. Anyway, I have an accent, so you need to choose my accent or Arabic. Okay, we'll start with the accent. Anyway, this is the problem with Palestinian actually. Hatem, all the time we start, before 1948, all the time we speak about this is how our life changed totally. Because what happened before 1948 and what happened after 1948. And for me, I'm working with Mecca, Middle East Children's Alliance. Are you familiar with?
Yeah.
So that's good. Most of our work, actually, we work with children in refugee camps in towns and cities. We work with refugees in Syria, we work with refugees in Iraq before, and now we are working with Palestinian. And what I heard from Hatem, I don't want to go with all. Hatem, he gave background, but how this impact me, what Hatem said. But I'm not going to go to the period before 1948. I will switch it, Hatem. Thank you. What Hatem said, like in numbers, statistics, and history, it impacted me and my life personally. So I learned a lot. I learned what Hatem said, but in a different way. I learned that from my mom since I was a child. I learned about my village from my mom and her generation. I don't know my dad, he passed away when I was young. So most of my education when I was a child came from women. The women, they come in our house, and I grew up hearing this story about our village. So I had my own imagination when I was a child about the village. And I start all the time, like I start building in my head what it means to return back. Because my mom and her generation, usually they used to say, when we go back, inshallah, when we go back. So for me, when we go back, it seems like very soon. And I start imagining that. I was born and grew up in a refugee camp, I'll show you later. But I start imagining that when we go back, it means the trucks will line up in the front of the camp. We'll take our furniture. We don't have that much furniture anyway. We had a few mattresses, and we put it in the truck, and we will drive toward the west. For anyone knows the Hesha, you go toward Hebron, and after that, you go toward the village. This is how I imagined right of return when I was a child. So I learned at the same time that my village, my mom, in 1948, in October 14th, the Zionist groups, they attacked our village. They killed 3 people. most of the people in the village, they went toward Hebron area, just a few miles, and they were waiting in the mountains. And they were thinking, they thought in that period, that when they stop bombing the village, they will return back to the village. But my mom continued until she find her in the refugee camp. So, I will go with the villages. I saw the number with Hatem, but here what you see, this is the map of Palestine actually, 1878. All what you see here, Palestinian villages and cities. My village is here. I did my research about my village in 80s, and I find this picture for my village, Zakaria, and this picture for the village in 1929. I want you to look and keep this picture in your mind. All these hills here, nothing, but this is the village. Later on, I was working as a journalist in Palestine before I came here. And in 1998, Israel, they opened the archive when they were celebrating 50 years in Israel state. So they opened the archive. Some of my Israeli friends, I can say, human rights activists in that period, they succeed to collect some photos. All what you see right now, photos from the Zionist archive. Here you can see the tanks. When Hatem spoke about how the Zionist movement funded and supported by the British, they were armed very well. This is in a village called Ajur. This is a village called Beit Natif. This house still exists until now. These are the Zionist groups. They are cooking, they are relaxing. And he spoke about the Ilan Babeh book. How many of you read Ilan Babeh book? I recommend this book. Hatem mentioned that, but in the introduction of the book, that meeting in the Red House in March 8th, 1948, how 11 leaders of the Zionist movement, they planned the ethnic cleansing. So the ethnic cleansing, it was happening first, uprooting the people by doing massacres. Second, destroyed the houses. Third, plant trees. Uproot, destroy, plant. This is the main part of the plan, the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. So here you see there are some Zionists, they are celebrating and relaxing in one of the Palestinian houses, in front of one of the Palestinian houses. They are using the animals here. Here, when we speak about destroying the houses, you see these photos, preparing the explosives. Second, destroyed the houses. This is the cover of the book, but this actually reminds me with my mom, because my mom, when she was uprooted from our village, Zakaria, she was without shoes. She had 2 children. My sister, she was 2 years old. My brother, he was 2 weeks old. My brother in October, actually end of October, he will be 70 years old with the Nakba. Other people, they left Palestine toward Lebanon. Others, they were arrested. They put them in a prison. And you see this photo, transfer. Actually, this bus to Gaza. Look here what they are wearing. And this is only a few years after the Holocaust. And sometimes I say, this is when the victim become a victimizer. Just. And here it was like the 750,000. They moved to 5 directions: Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, West Bank, and Gaza Strip. My family actually came here. I know next speaker, she will speak about Jerusalem, and later will explain. But I was born in Dehesha refugee camp. In this refugee camp, this is our camp actually, Dehesha. This is the main road between Hebron and Jerusalem. And we came to the Dehesha refugee camp in 1948, my family. Our tent used to be in this side, out of the picture. These are, the United Nations built these rooms, by the way. The first response for the Palestinian refugees came by the Red Cross International. And in May 1st, 1950, the United Nations replaced the Red Cross, the UNRWA. So me personally, I was born in 1964. I was born in one of these rooms. Each room, it was 81 square feet, 9 feet by 9 feet. And by the way, I can do other presentation just about the rooms. Because it's not just we grew up in this room. This is how we are, like in our blood, how we grew up. Because everything you are waiting. For example, each 25 rooms, which it means each 25 families, they use 2 bathrooms. One for men, one for women. Imagine every morning you need to wait to use the bathroom. This is when we speak about refugees. And this is when we hear about refugees right now, Syrian refugees, or any other refugees in the world. This is how they live. This is a picture inside the house. And this is, Hagen spoke about the water, I'll explain later. But this is how my mom used to carry the water in her head every day. And by the way, I moved here 10 years ago. I enjoy 2 things. First, I can shower every day. Second, I can drive where I want. Now, shower every day, I used to shower 1 time a week. Because my mom, she used to carry the water, and sometimes 2-3 miles from the springs around the camp. This is our camp later, 1968. This is the main road I can speak. This is the school where I finished my education. This is why my English language very bad. Because they taught us English in the 5th grade, ABC, and it was United Nations curriculum. They used to teach us Columbus discovered America. And later on, we find out Columbus did not discover America. Like Palestine, a land without people, for people without land. Anyway, this is my camp recently later. This is the fence surrounding my camp. I spent 10 years of my life behind this fence. Before they built the wall, between 1985 and 1995, we destroyed the fence after the Israeli withdrew from Bethlehem area in December 21st, 1995. It was a big celebration in our camp to destroy the fence. This is my camp right now. Look to the roofs of the houses, how that changes, the water tanks, and this is the reason how the people they live without, and especially summer right now, it's coming, it means they need to buy the water. And of course, in our camps and different areas, a collective punishment. Even we have water tanks, look. And this is a testimony actually for Amnesty International by an Israeli soldier. He served in the army. They used to target the water tanks. Of course, here we speak about jails. And this is in front of our camp actually. Most of these photos in front of our camp. People, how they are arrested. Some of the photos when I was working as a journalist, and I know everyone in the picture actually here. They are from my camp. This is Palestinian childhood. And this is the reality. Anyway, my name is Ziad. Ziad means in Arabic actually extra additional. I am the youngest one in my family. And according to my mom, I came by mistake. She didn't plan to have the 5th child. But my mom, she tried to be smart because I had 2 brothers, 2 sisters. She doesn't want me to be involved in politics. And so in my case, actually, I grew up in the refugee camp, waiting in lines to use the bathroom, etc. My mom failed when I was a child. Because in our case, we did not choose to be political people. Politics chose us, our reality. This is how we grew up in the refugee camp. And this is when I say Palestinian children, and we are working with children without childhood. But even the children, they try to resist, they try to respond, they try to react to their reality. I know, I look to the picture there, you know, Ahmed Tamimi. Right now, actually, we have over 350 children in a prison, Israeli prison. And this is another topic. We have 6,500 Palestinian political prisoners, among them over 350 children, among them actually right now, with the statistics, it's almost 62 women in the prison. you can see this is the childhood in Palestine. I'm sure some of you saw these photos before. This is now, we say 34, I need to update it, but actually 62. But among them, 8 girls. Most of you know Zahid Tamimi, right? Do you know Amal? No. Do you know Laila? No. I know we are lucky that Ahad because the international coverage. But we have other 8 girls actually below 18 years old right now in Israeli jail. And this is a statistic actually, between 500 to 700 children, they are charged in military court. Israel, the only country in the world doing this. They send children to military courts. Okay, here we want to speak about Gaza. Hatem, he spoke about this. But I want to clarify like a few things about Gaza, because if we spoke, did you mention it's the open prison on earth?
The largest.
The largest, yeah. But why it's the largest? Look at this area. We have 6 gates for Gaza Strip. 5 controlled by the Israelis, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And this one is controlled by the Egyptian. Here, the Israeli military ships all the time. And by the way, 2 days ago, because the people in Gaza, they try to break down the siege. They march to the borders. And actually, yesterday, since long time actually, they took the boat and they tried to break the siege, taking the boats. Many of the people, they joined that boat. They were injured from people, they need medicine. Some of them, they are sick people with cancer. They cannot get these kind of medicine inside Gaza Strip. And Gaza actually, it's not big area. Gaza is only 139 square meters. It's tiny area, it's not a huge, and you have 2 million of the people, they are living in this area. At the same time, the majority of the people living in Gaza, they are children below 18 years old. Here you can see 43% of the people in Gaza Strip, they are below 15 years old. So when we think about Gaza, we need to think about the majority, they are children below 18 years old. And this is actually Gaza, just to show the buffer zone, how they control Gaza. These are the people, they don't come to the borders here where the Israeli army. The people, when they march, they come to these areas. Here, to this area. They can't come to this area here. They can't come to this. What we see in the TV, that it's not about the borders, is here. So Israel is still inside Gaza Strip, inside the area in Gaza. Here, Hatem, he mentioned that last few days, actually, they attacked Gaza. You remember 2008, 2009 attack on Gaza Strip, 2012, and 2014. But these are the weapons that was used by the Israeli occupation when they attacked Gaza. This is when they attacked the 139 square miles. 2 million people living there. Even I choose this slide actually, and we work with the United Nations a lot in Gaza, and during that period actually, they attacked even the American International School. I want to go back. Most of this women coming from where?
United States.
I can't say that, you say
Sorry.
it. So, and even they attacked the American International School in Gaza. These are the facts here. The water issue, Hatem spoke about it a little bit, but in Gaza it's a huge problem. In Gaza, actually, according to Amnesty International, according to United Nations, according even the Israeli Human Rights Organization, Beit Salem, they say 95% of the water in Gaza is polluted. And by the way, guys, we have enough water in Palestine. We have 8 aquifers. 4 aquifers inside Israel, 3 aquifers inside West Bank, and 1 aquifer inside Gaza. The aquifer in Gaza is polluted totally. And even before the Israel would withdraw from Gaza or move out of Gaza, the settlements and the settlers, the 8,000 settlers they used to live in Gaza in that period, but the water is done. And the only choice for the people in Gaza to get clean water, to get from West Bank. And it's our water. And for me, even in Palestine, like for example, I say that the water is very expensive for us. The settlers, they access the water, our water. Israel's control like 85% of the water. Palestinians, they receive 15%. We pay 3 times to our water. It is our water. But we buy it from the Israelis and we pay 3 times more. Children affected a lot in Gaza. And here you can see, this is the changes it was having. Most of the funds, it's coming from United States. I think Lara, she will speak about that later. This is my village now, guys. This is, look how the mountains, they planted trees. And I visited my village the first time in 1998 with my uncle. And the first time for me, my uncle, he was uprooted from the village when he was 18 years old. And we visited the village in 1998. The first time, when we were driving, and my uncle, he can see villages. Me, I see forest. Because they plant these trees not because they like the nature. They plant these trees because they want to erase our history. This is another photo for the village. All the people living in the village right now, they are Jewish Israelis. The mosque is still there, and one of the schools is still there, and one of the houses still exists there. This is my mother village. It's nature reserve. It's only for the Israelis to have a fresh air and to go have barbecue and enjoy the nature. But the indigenous people used to live in this village. They are living in refugee camps all over. This is among the programs we used to take, the children. And this is, when I said about right of return, when I was in the imagination when I was young, and still it's in my head, and I hope someday it will happen. But I can say the Palestinians, they are practicing right of return. Do you remember this photo, any of you? 2011, do you remember when the Palestinians, they marched from Lebanon, they marched from Syria? This photo actually in Golan Heights. This is the people coming from the Syrian border. They crossed the borders. And there is one case, one Palestinian refugee from Yarmouk refugee camp. He succeeded to pass, and he went, visited his village. Later he was arrested and deported. You can see the people, how they climbed the fence. And this is Gaza now. And they still practice the right of return. And Gaza, Hatem explained, there are a lot of issues in Gaza. It's not just what they say, politics, but the people, they fed up. They are frustrated in Gaza. This is where they start. We cannot live like this 12 years under the siege. And I like this photo, actually. They used the onion. I used it. And I believe the peace in the Middle East, to bring the peace in the Middle East without right of return, it will never be a peace. Because for me, sometimes they say 1 state, 2 states, 3 states, 5 states. To be honest with you, I don't care. I care about right of return. I want to access my right. I want to be, I want to have the chance to choose where I want to live. This is the way how I see the peace. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Abbas, for sharing your personal story and helping us to know more about the general refugee crisis. And now our last speaker is Lara Kiswani from the Arab Resource Organizing Center, who will also share some family story as well as letting us know about organizing in the Bay Area. Please.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for being out here, although there's a Warriors game, so I'm impressed with the turnout. Not that I'm a Warriors fan. I shouldn't have said that out loud. My name is Lara Kiswani. My father is from Beit Iksa, the district of Jerusalem. He spent every day of his life going to Old Jerusalem. My mother is from Aqib, which is in what is now known as Israel, in 1948 Palestine, in the district of Ramle. My grandmother and her family on my mother's side were forcibly displaced from their home in 1948 and were refugees in Jordan. So my mother's entire family and grandmother and aunts and uncles and cousins have never been able to go to Jordan since. As people who are refugees in Jordan, they do only have the Jordanian citizenship, do not have any other access in order to actually come see their homeland. So they spend many visits across the border in Jordan where they can be on the hilltops and see Palestine, but they can never actually touch it. Unlike my mother, who had the privilege of getting a US citizenship through my father, and as a result was able to visit Palestine once in her lifetime. My father, on the other hand, is from the West Bank, or from the district of Jerusalem. His family was forcibly displaced from Beit Iksa in 1948. They fled fearful for their lives after hearing about massacres throughout historic Palestine. He was 10 years old at the time. He had over 12 siblings. He always recalled the story, telling me as a child that when they left, also barefoot, running from Beit Iksa to find some refuge somewhere, they realized halfway through that they forgot his little sister. And so they had to run back and get her. And he would always tell the story and laugh. And we grew up kind of finding it comical, the absurdity of the experience of being displaced from your home, and the absurdity of the ways in which that displacement and dispossession continues until today. As somebody who was born and raised in the United States, born and raised right here in the Bay Area, I want to speak to you as a Palestinian based in the Bay Area, born and raised in the Bay Area, and understanding what our role, not only as Arabs and Palestinians here in the United States, but what our role as people here in the United States is, and our responsibility in supporting the liberation of Palestine and the right of return of all refugees, of Palestinian refugees. I speak to you about Palestine, and I say it's a central issue for all of us, not because I'm Palestinian, not because I'm Arab, not because my name is Lara Kiswani, meaning I'm from the village of Beit Iksa, but because I see Palestine, and we Arabs and Palestinians understand Palestine as a central internationalist issue. You cannot support social justice, you cannot support human rights, you cannot support the dignity of people and the freedom of people to live and move freely and not support the struggle for the Palestinian people. And also, as people living here in the United States and understanding, as Hassan so eloquently explained, the settler colonial history of the land we stand on here, we also can't turn a blind eye to the current settler colonial state and project in Palestine and the relationship and partnership it has with the United States. Understanding that all the slides you saw of Gaza, all the things the slides of the maps you saw that Hatem also showed us and illustrated in terms of how we were forcibly displaced from our homeland systemically since prior to 1948 would not have been possible without the economic, military, and political support of this government. I don't have to tell you all that. I think all of you are well aware of that and probably why you're here to begin with. But also to remember historically the roles of people across the world and really challenging apartheid, colonialism, as we did in South Africa. When the United States supported South Africa, it was people in the United States that said, absolutely not in our name. We will not allow you to continue to support ethnic cleansing, segregation, and apartheid, whether it's miles away or anywhere, because nobody is free unless all of us are free. And so we were able to chip away at South African apartheid and put an end to it. And it is our belief that if we all work collectively together, we too can make an example for history and of the world if we are able to put an end once and for all to Israeli apartheid. I want to talk a little bit about how Israel shows up in our everyday here in the United States. How the U.S.-Israeli partnership is not just an economic, political partnership and financial partnership and political partnership and military partnership that exists miles away in Palestine, but it shows up every single day right here in the Bay Area. Zionism, that the ideology that backs the creation and the continuation of the settler colonial state of Israel. Zionism, that which says that a Jewish person anywhere in the world has a right to live in my homeland where my family can't live and can't be and walk freely. Zionism manifests itself in every single way that we understand racism, white supremacy right here in the United States. We can talk about Zionism and its role in policing. How many police departments here in the United States have been trained by Israeli defense forces? How many have been sent to Israel by the ADL, the same organization that supposedly is an anti-bigotry organization at the forefront of talking about hate crimes and racism only when it comes to white supremacists, when they understand white supremacy, taking themselves out of the equation while understanding that Zionism is in fact white supremacy. Zionism is another face of the supremacy of a religious, ethnic, a minority group in an indigenous land of people. We can also talk about the ways in which it shows up in schooling. So I grew up here in the Bay Area. I grew up telling my teachers that I'm from Palestine and them responding to me that Palestine doesn't exist. I grew up being told to go point on a map to where my people are from, and when I pointed and said, well, my country isn't listed there, but that's my country, Palestine, I was told I was wrong. And I was taught from a very young age that in order to assert my identity, I had to actually challenge power. And it was then that I made a commitment to the dignity of all oppressed people. And it was then that I said, I will commit my life to the liberation of Palestine, not just for Palestinians, because no child should ever have to face that type of undignified experience. No one should have to face this type of dehumanization, whether in a classroom here in the Bay Area or anywhere around the world. And it's that commitment to people's dignity and liberation that really inspires all of us to continue to fight for Palestinians.
Woo! Woo!
We can also talk about the way in which Zionism shows up in surveillance. So it is one of the largest exporter of surveillance technology around the world. At a time when we're talking about the Trump administration, white supremacy, we're talking about militarization and militarism, we're talking about the ways in which we're being criminalized for even speaking out against U.S. policies as sometimes citizens or non-citizens in this country. We have to understand the role of surveillance, and all of us are becoming much more diligent in understanding the role of surveillance. A lot of the technology being used against us here in the United States is actually developed in Israel. And a lot of the tactics and trainings that are happening here in the Bay Area and across the country were practiced in Gaza and across Palestine. What better place to continue to dehumanize and experiment on an entire population than a country that continues to get away with literally executing people day in and day out, that being the state of Israel. So for all of these reasons, it's necessary for us to understand the struggle of the Palestinian people as the struggle for all of our liberation, right? As a struggle for all of us. Because really it is a responsibility of every single person in the world, but particularly every single person in the belly of the beast right here in the United States, to continue to challenge apartheid, Zionism, and colonialism, white supremacy everywhere.
Woo!
But also, it's a human rights issue, and I would like to think that in 2018 we still care about human rights, or some of us do, right? And so it shouldn't be okay that this is happening, regardless of whether the U.S. had a hand in it or not. But the fact that we're here makes it that much more important for us to challenge it. And the fact that Zionism manifests itself every single day within our own society makes it that much more important that we put an end to it. And I also want to kind of not just talk about the struggles. We want to talk about our wins. Because we know that when we fight together and we make these connections between white supremacy, between racism and Zionism, between militarization, that we are in fact making strides against all those committed to our oppression and committed to continuing to having children feel erased, having children be and literally executed, and having Ziad have a conversation with someone in Palestine.
Gaza.
Okay, go ahead. Gosh. So I would like to take a step back for a second and remind us of what's happening currently in the Bay Area and how we've actually chipped away at Zionism here and there. So let's celebrate a victory, a large victory, against Zionism and militarization, that being the ending urban shield.
Woo!
Woo! Just as the United States remains committed to apartheid, While Zionism continues to manifest itself everywhere, while it's one of the largest militaries in the world, that being Israel, backed by the largest military in the world, that being the United States, while it feels impossible to make wins in this political moment, we literally put an end to the largest SWAT training in the entire world, one that brings Israel to train local emergency responders and police. And we made it known to Zionists here, to white supremacists, to all those committed to militarization and warmongering, that we won't allow that in the Bay Area or anywhere, and we will actually win by organizing and doing the hard work that it takes for years to chip away at these systems of oppression. So congratulations to everyone for chipping away at Zionism in a very small but direct way, that if whether or not we understand it today, we will understand historically that these small wins are in fact contributing to the liberation of Palestine and contributing to ending apartheid anywhere. The other example I want to use is an example that also sort of illustrates the role in which Zionism kind of seeps its way into our everyday experience. So for 3 years, AROC's youth programming, I work with the Arab Resource and Organizing Center. We've ran youth programming for over 10 years in San Francisco, going into high schools, so that children like myself, when I grew up in the Bay Area, don't have to experience what we experienced, where they can actually feel seen and heard, have a space to talk to other people that have those shared experiences, but also learn about their culture and feel empowered and proud of who they are, and find support for different ways that they can also feel supported to achieve things academically and professionally in their lives. We did that for years. And after we were able to chip away at Zionism in 2014, when we stopped the largest Israeli Zim ship from ever docking at the port of Oakland again, when us in the Bay Area, we literally blocked the boat, and we've blocked it since, so that Zionist ship hasn't come back. It's good to remember that we did that while Gaza was being bombed, that the Bay Area stood together united in support of Palestinian resistance and support of Palestinian self-determination, and actually made a huge impact economically and politically on the state of Israel. But for that reason, the Zionists here locally felt threatened, and they decided then to take action so that we couldn't continue to build power in our community. What is worse for those committed to oppression of people than seeing those same people building power in their communities, feeling dignified in their lives, feeling dignified wherever they are? And so they wanted to attack Arab youth programming. So the JCRC, the Jewish Community Relations Council, for 3 years bullied the Board of Education in San Francisco Unified School District in not allowing AROC to just simply come into the schools and work with our own communities. No financial ties. It was an agreement to allow us into the schools like every other community-based organization. So imagine for 3 years, since 2015, Arab youth were not allowed to receive those kinds of critical services. Imagine the Trump administration comes into power and Arab youth are not allowed to receive those critical services, all due to what? To the attack by the Jewish Community Relations Council. This is indicative of the ways in which Zionism seeps into our everyday lives and why it is so critical that we call it out everywhere. Now, I named this struggle because it was a serious and critical struggle, but we won. So as of a few weeks ago, the Board of Education voted 6-1 to allow Iraq back into the schools. So we don't have the financial money to fund contributions and get people elected like the JCRC. We don't have the ties to an apartheid state that has the ties to the current government of this country. We don't have that kind of political power, but we have our commitments and our values, and we have the people power. And by organizing and working together, we were able to defeat the attempts by the Zionists and racists and Islamophobes from stopping Arabs to receive critical services. So that is a great example of how in the Bay Area, we are both struggling against Zionism and winning against Zionism. Now, while I say that, we just learned today that right here in the Bay Area, in San Francisco, while Palestinians are being executed in Gaza, and while the entire world is condemning it, San Francisco and the city decided to celebrate Israel. So right there in San Francisco, without us even realizing it was happening, there was a celebration for Israel this morning. So right there in San Francisco, they erected a monument to celebrate their ties and their connections to the state of Israel, literally in their own words. So many years ago, the city of San Francisco made a commitment to have a sister city relationship. There's many sister city relationships across the country. Palestinians historically have struggled and won to have sister city relationship with our cities, that including Haifa in Palestine. And so there's a sister city relationship within the occupied city of Palestine, that being Haifa, between San Francisco and Haifa. It's a symbolic relationship. It often just means political delegations going and having some other sort of diplomatic ties. Now, never have they celebrated and erected a monument to celebrate the sister city relationship. In fact, we have been talking for years about making sure that we challenge the sister city relationship. Because if you're going to have a sister city relationship with any city as a liberal city that prides itself on social justice, have it with not an occupied city, not an apartheid city that represents the colonization and dispossession of a people, right? Like Sacramento made sure to have a sister city with Bethlehem. That's where San Francisco should be paying its attention. But instead of ending its ties, or at least condemning Israel in this political moment, the city of San Francisco, Farrell, the current mayor, the supervisors, decided to celebrate Israel right under our noses. As you all were so really courageously organizing this event and making time to be here to learn about the Palestinian struggle, as people, regular folks are trying to educate each other and learn about how we can contribute to the well-being and dignity and human rights of people globally, city officials, public officials, decision makers, those accountable, elected by all of us, are celebrating Israel. Now, I say this because it makes it that much more important that we strengthen the boycott, divest, and sanction movement here in the Bay Area. It should not be acceptable. It should not be normalized. It should not be allowed that people that we are electing, that are in offices such as the mayor's office in the city of San Francisco, are celebrating apartheid and racism, celebrating the human rights violations, massacres of Palestinians, while we sit here and organize events like this. Well, we will continue to do this type of work, and this type of work must continue, but we must also put pressure on those in power to not allow this to continue. We must put pressure on not all those in power to not enable and normalize relations with organizations and Zionist institutions that are arms of the apartheid state, that being the JCRC and the ADL. These organizations only represent apartheid and racism. So we've made strides and wins against them, but we must continue to challenge them everywhere. We must continue to denormalize Zionism and apartheid and hold everyone accountable who chooses to celebrate ethnic cleansing and racism rather than celebrate its resistance like that happening in this room. So thank you for making time to hear me out, and I hope that we all leave today with a renewed commitment to continue to boycott and divest and sanction Israel, not only ourselves and our organizations, but bringing that into our neighborhoods and communities, and also making sure we call all those in San Francisco that held this event today, and letting them know that we as people in the Bay Area are not okay with it.
And reminding us of the opportunities we have to work for the liberation of Palestinians and all people. We have a special surprise. We have a Skype connection with Mr. Hadi Al-Madoun, who is in Gaza. So let's go ahead.
Marhaba Hani. Hani?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, feel free, the mic with you.
Yes, can you hear me?
Can you hear him?
Yes.
Yes, they can hear you. Hani?
That's good. Good evening, everyone.